In 1973, when a team of 8 recreational divers were exploring an underwater cavern known as the Shaft, things went horrifyingly wrong. As a result, half of the team didn't make it back to the surface. When I first read this story, I thought this may be one of the worst cave diving disasters I have ever come across on the internet. So I thought, why not tell this tragic tale to you guys as well? So here is the Mount Gambier cave diving disaster. So the Shaft is basically a flooded sinkhole discovered in 1938 in a field known as Thompson's Paddock on a farm near Allendale, a few kilometers south of Mount Gambier, Australia. When this sinkhole was first found, it appeared to be a little hole in the ground, nothing out of ordinary. But shortly thereafter, it was found to be not so normal, as it was actually a shaft opening into a large sinkhole. It is 3 feet wide and leads to a huge underwater cavern. Years later, this sinkhole became known as the Shaft and a famous location among divers for its clear water and interesting internal structure. So the cavern that this hole leads to is comprised of a main chamber. It is about 140 meters long and 80 meters wide. However, if a diver actually jumps into the hole, they won't reach the water right away, as the water level actually starts about 7 meters below the ground level, which is basically the starting point of the main chamber. Moreover, inside, right when you enter the cavern, there is an intersection, one of which extends to the northwest to a depth of about 80 meters and then the other to the east that reaches a maximum depth of 124 meters. So as you can see, the main tunnel kind of splits into 2 sub-tunnels. However, the full depth, which is 124 meters, is not really the maximum depth, as the cave is not fully explored. It is believed that the full depth of the cave is much more than just 120 something meters. So just keep that in mind, because if you ever got lost, that'll be the end for you. So with that in mind, despite the hazardousness, on 26th of May 1973, a team of 9 divers arrived at the Mount Gambier in South Australia with the intention of exploring at the Shaft. The group was consisted of 3 siblings whose names were Christine, Glenn and Stephen, along with their friends named John, Peter, Larry, Gordon and Robert. Though the 9th diver, whose name was Joanne, later decided to not venture into the cave and instead remained beside the sinkhole preparing hot soup and assisting the group in other ways. They planned to spend 2 days near Mount Gambier diving in the cave. The first day, which was 27th of May, went smoothly just as planned. They finished a successful exploration, reaching a depth of 46 meters. There they got to the primary point of interest known as the rock pile. It is a central pile of limestone rubble about 40 meters directly below the sinkhole entrance. So they briefly explored the perimeter of this rock pile before surfacing. So now the first day of diving was over. With their short line already in place, the group planned to return the next morning and continue the cave exploration. So as planned, they arrived at the Shaft the next morning. It was 28th of May. Before setting off, they first refilled their 72 cubic feet cylinders. Then they got ready, put on the diving gear and jumped in. With the experience they got from the previous day's dive, they quickly descended to the rock pile with no problems at all. Normally, this rock pile is the boundary for safe recreational diving. Anything beyond that is considered the danger zone. So this is when they should turn back and make the ascent to the surface after exploring around for a little while. Well, they did something different. You see, there was another boundary called the edge. It is far beyond the rock pile. Basically, it is a narrow and downward sloping continuation of the cave. It is on one side of the main chamber, far from natural light that the shaft provides by the sinkhole opening. Though beyond that point is horrifyingly dark, and also it is unexplored and covered in silt and limestone rubble. Just the worst possible conditions for underwater diving. But here's the thing, in most diving accident stories I've told on this channel so far, divers intentionally plan ahead to swim into danger zones, whereas this group did not have a specific plan or a destination to reach, certainly not beyond the edge. Instead, they just went with the flow and spontaneously had decided on the spot to go beyond the rock pile. It seems each member has acted on their own instincts to continue beyond the boundary. You see, out of everyone, Robert was the most experienced in cave diving, and prior to the dive, he had actually given a brief plan as to what to do in the dive, but it was nothing too specific, like never go beyond the rock pile or anything of that sort. He has presumed that everybody like yesterday will turn around at rock pile and surface, but that didn't happen. Instead, now they're diving in complete darkness beyond the boundary. Some are far ahead in the danger zone, while others are taking it slow, hesitating. Now, all while, what any of them did not know was that they have neglected a few key safety protocols much early in the dive. You see, the shoreline they used the previous day is the one they are using now, as I already mentioned it earlier. However, it does not extend all the way beyond the edge. For some reason, it had never occurred to anyone. And also, no one was equipped with additional air tanks or, at the bare minimum, an air management strategy to reserve some air to use for the extra time that they are about to spend in the water. They simply had no proper approach at all. In risky dives like this, you are supposed to establish specific diving partners, but just like with everything else, they didn't do that either. In other words, they did not use any form of safety guidelines. Now, to make matters worse, if you continue downward even further into the darkness, you are certain to get extreme nitrogen narcosis, especially if the breathing gas is not diluted by helium. Hell, you don't have to go that deep. Even at the depth of the rock pile, the effects of narcosis are pretty impactful. So the group, without even knowing, actually have been suffering from narcosis since they have passed the rock pile. From every angle, their situation is not getting any better, yet they kept pushing themselves to explore farther into the unknown. It didn't take too long. They found themselves in a fatal situation. Now, the survivors of this incident have their own version of what happened next, so let me tell you what exactly happened once all the different accounts are pieced together. At the rock pile, Robert had already began feeling the effects of nitrogen narcosis. He was an adept diver, so when he saw his depth gauge reading approximately 55 meters, he knew it was about time that he turns back. He was familiar with the symptoms of narcosis as well. He realized spending any longer at the depth that he is at right now will only worsen his condition, so he quickly signaled to the rest of the group that he was returning to the top of the rock pile where he will be safe. The group said okay, but we are going to continue exploring a bit more. Robert then nodded and ascended to the top of the rock pile and stayed there circling around for about 8 minutes while also searching for animal bones to kill the time. Then, out of nowhere, he saw a torchlight getting brighter towards him. He thought, okay, by now everyone should surface, so this must be them. But it was only Glenn, returning from the direction that others had gone. He was alone, the others were not with him or behind him. Apparently, Glenn also had been monitoring his air like Robert. So, when he knew that it was time to leave, he had tried to tap Christine on her arm to let her know that her time is also up, but the two had gotten separated before he could. When Glenn met Robert at the top of the rock pile, the two decided to continue ascending to the surface together before coming to any consensus on what to do next. Once they clambered out of the water, they learned that they aren't the only ones to surface on time. Larry also had returned. In fact, he was the first one to surface. Then, not even a minute went by, another one surfaced. It was Peter. He almost had run out of air and drowned, but he had gotten lucky. So now, half of the team is safely back on the surface, but 4 more members are yet to come. They panicked a bit, knowing the others must also have low air supplies by this point. So Glenn quickly put on a spare air tank and jumped back into the water. He got too anxious, thinking the worst, as both his sister and brother were among the ones in the water. He rushed and descended to a depth of 69 meters. It's the point where the cliff begins sloping downward and beyond the boundary into the danger zone. There he found Stefan's torch and camera, but not him. A tremendous amount of silt has been stirred up and the visibility was just almost zero. Glenn knew something bad has happened, but he couldn't wait to find out as he was also running out of air, so he had to turn back and return back to the surface. On the way he had to stop to decompress a bit as well. Now I can imagine how he must have felt. It must have been unbearable for him to make the return trip to the surface knowing his two siblings and the two friends are still down there in the water and most likely even dead. By the time he surfaced, there was an ambulance at the sinkhole. Everybody was on edge. They knew they are just waiting for some terrible news. Peter got impatient to find out and returned to the cave for one more look, but just like Glenn, he found nobody, no nothing. At this point, everybody knew that they are not looking for survivors but just a bunch of dead bodies. Reportedly, here's what actually has happened to the victims. Once Christine and Gordon realized that they should surface, they had turned around and attempted to ascend as fast as possible to the rock pile. However, instead diving up along the slope, they had descended down even deeper. They had swam straight down thinking they're actually ascending. They were worried that they'll run out of air, so that kind of clouded their judgment. They got confused and dived the opposite direction. Eventually, they had ended up swimming upward into a dome in the ceiling, which has led to a dead end. Most likely, they have been suffering from nitrogen narcosis while also being surrounded in silt and rubble. They couldn't see anything and failed to find an exit. The two knew that they had no escape, as their air supply was also almost fully exhausted. So the two embraced each other during their final moments as they knew that their death was imminent. So just like that, they died in each other's arms. Larry later had mentioned about seeing two torches frantically moving up and down while he was in the water. It was as if whoever was using the lights was panicking looking for an exit, but it was too late before he had the chance to reach them and help as they had swum the wrong direction at a higher speed. He believes that it was Christine and Gordon, but that was the last time the two had been seen alive. When rescue divers went searching for the corpses, these two were the first ones to be found. At the time of their discovery, they were still in the position of holding each other. Similarly, John also had suffered a gruesome fate. With the effects of nitrogen narcosis, he also had swam strongly downward further into the cave. With the confusion and disorientation he got from narcosis, he hadn't realized that he was actually swimming to his death. His body was located about 6 meters further down where he was last seen, and was at the greatest depth of all the discovered corpses. Finally, the last victim, Glenn's brother Stefan, though in his case it's a little different. Unlike others, he had actually found the right direction to ascend, but unfortunately he has still gotten lost beneath the cave ceiling shortly before the surviving divers surfaced. Although his torch and camera were found deep at the base of the rock pile, his body was found under an overhang at a depth of only about 15 meters. So remember, when Glenn jumped in for the second time to look for Stefan and others, he must have dived by Stefan's corpse as it was hidden under the overhang. Compared to other victims, not much is known about Stefan's final moments, but it's clear that he had tried his best to surface as he was only 15 meters below the surface. So after many failed attempts, rescue divers finally recovered the corpses. It was not a regular recovery operation, as even the most pro rescue divers had an extremely difficult time locating the bodies. In fact, it took them almost an year to discover all 4 corpses. The cause of death in all 4 was found to be lack of air with terminal drowning. So all in all, what seemed like a simple and fun dive turned out being one of the most tragic diving accidents in the history of cave diving world. To this day, the shaft is known as the bottomless hole. The other end of the hole or the cavern has never been explored. People say it has no end. The deeper you dive, the more endless it becomes. All you will find beyond the edge is just darkness and death. The ones who are curious enough to venture into such an environment is more likely to not return. The best example is this, the fate of Christine, Gordon, Stephen, and John. So that was their story. There's a lesson we all could learn from their ordeal. If you made it this far in the video, I hope in your own ways you have already interpreted that lesson. Alright, with that said, we've got to the end of the story. If you like this kind of content, you could consider subscribing and leaving your thoughts down in the comment section. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys with another story pretty soon. Until then, stay safe out there and goodbye.